At 71, most people are trying to slow down. Daunte Fields did the opposite. He rebuilt himself so completely that now, in many ways, he outperforms people decades younger. It's not just how he looks, it's how he moves. The speed, the coordination, the clarity in his posture. There's no hesitation in his body, no sense of fragility that people usually associate with age. And that's what makes it uncomfortable to watch, because it challenges a belief most people carry quietly in the background, that after a certain point, decline is inevitable. Daunte didn't accept that, but he also didn't fight it the way most people do. He didn't rely on short bursts of motivation or temporary transformations. He didn't treat fitness like a project with a deadline. For him, movement became something else entirely. It became part of his identity. That's where his story really begins. Most people approach exercise like a phase. A few weeks of effort, then a break, then starting again from zero. The body never fully adapts, it just keeps reacting to stress. Daunte broke that cycle early. Instead of thinking in terms of getting in shape, he built a rhythm that didn't depend on motivation. Training became as regular as eating or sleeping. Not forced, not dramatic, just consistent. And over time, that consistency changed how his body responded. It stopped treating exercise as stress. It started treating it as normal. That shift is subtle, but it's where real adaptation happens. The cardiovascular system becomes more efficient. Hormonal balance stabilizes. Energy stops fluctuating wildly and becomes steady. But here's where his approach becomes more interesting. He doesn't train for appearance, he trains for function. There's a difference. A lot of people focus on isolated exercises, chasing aesthetics without realizing that the body doesn't operate in isolated parts. It operates as a system. Daunte trains that system. Strength work is a big part of his routine. Kettlebells, resistance exercises, controlled lifting. Not excessive, but intentional. Because strength isn't just about muscle, it's about preserving the structure of the body. Bone density, joint stability, the ability to generate force when it's needed. Without that, the body starts to lose its integrity. But strength alone isn't enough. You can be strong and still feel slow, stiff, disconnected. So he adds something most people overlook: functional movement. Exercises that require balance, coordination, reaction. Movements that force the body to stabilize, adjust, respond. This is where youth starts to show. Not in how much you can lift, but in how well you can move. And Daunte moves like someone whose body still listens to him. That's not an accident. It's trained. Over years, he's built a system where strength supports movement and movement reinforces strength. One feeds the other, and that creates something that looks effortless, but isn't. It's simply well developed. But even that isn't the full picture. There's another factor he treats with the same level of attention, even though most people underestimate it. Body composition. Not in an obsessive way. Not through strict dieting or constant restriction, but through awareness. Daunte understands that excess body fat isn't just about appearance. It changes how the body functions. It affects hormones, increases inflammation, adds stress to the joints and cardiovascular system. Over time, it slows everything down. So instead of cycling between strict control and complete neglect, he built a steady system. His nutrition isn't extreme, it's stable. Meals that support energy without overload. Enough structure to keep his body in balance, but not so rigid that it becomes unsustainable. And because of that, his body stays in a state where it can perform, where it can recover, where it doesn't have to constantly compensate for extremes. And this is where things start to connect. Because consistent training works better when the body isn't overloaded. Movement improves when joints aren't under unnecessary stress. Energy stabilizes when nutrition isn't chaotic. It all feeds into the same system. But there's still one piece missing. One factor that separates people who look good for their age from people who seem to resist aging altogether. And it's something most people sacrifice without thinking. Sleep, not as a luxury, not as leftover time, but as a foundation. For Daunte, sleep isn't negotiable, because he understands that everything he builds during the day, strength, endurance, movement, only becomes real if his body has time to recover. And that recovery doesn't happen in the gym. It happens at night. While most people treat sleep as something flexible, he treats it as the most important part of the entire system. Because without it, everything else starts to break down slowly. And with it, the body has a chance to maintain itself in a completely different way. But what's interesting is not just that he prioritizes these things, it's how they start to work together. Training becomes more effective because recovery is solid. Recovery improves because stress is controlled. Body composition stays stable because the system isn't constantly disrupted. And over time, this creates something that's hard to fake. A body that doesn't just look younger, but functions like it. And that raises a different kind of question. If aging isn't just about time, then what is it really responding to? And this is where Daunte Fields separates himself even further, not in how hard he trains, but in how seriously he recovers. For him, sleep isn't passive, it's active repair. While most people see it as downtime, he understands what's actually happening beneath the surface. This is when tissues rebuild, when hormones responsible for recovery are released, when the nervous system finally stabilizes after a full day of nagruska. Take that away or reduce it, and the body doesn't just feel tired, it shifts into survival mode. Recovery slows down. Energy becomes inconsistent. Hormonal balance starts to drift. And the most dangerous part is how quietly it happens. There's no immediate collapse, just a gradual decline that's easy to ignore until it becomes your new normal. Daunte refuses to let it get that far. He protects his sleep the same way he protects his training, because he knows one without the other doesn't work. You can train perfectly, but if you don't recover, you don't improve. You just accumulate stress. And that brings us to something even more overlooked. What happens during the rest of the day? Most people believe 1 hour at the gym is enough to offset everything else. But the body doesn't work like that. It adapts to what you do most of the time, not what you do occasionally. So if training is 1 hour, but sitting is 10, the body learns stillness, metabolism slows, circulation becomes less efficient, muscles stay inactive for too long, and gradually, the benefits of that 1 hour begin to fade. Daunte understood this early. He doesn't separate activity from life. Movement is always present. He walks, shifts, stays physically engaged throughout the day, not in a forced way, but as a constant background. There's no extreme contrast between effort and complete inactivity, and that continuity creates something powerful. His body never fully shuts down. It stays ready, responsive, alive, which is why his energy doesn't spike and crash, it stays steady. But there's one more layer that ties everything together, and it's the one most people underestimate the most: psychology. Because you can build a strong body and still destroy it from the inside. Constant tension, anxiety, irritation. These don't just affect how you feel, they change how your body functions. When stress becomes chronic, the system shifts into defense mode. Recovery slows, inflammation rises, wear and tear accelerates. Daunte doesn't ignore this. He trains his internal state the same way he trains his body. Calmness, focus, emotional control, not as abstract ideas, but as practical tools. He knows how to switch off, how to step back from negativity instead of getting pulled into it, how to keep his mind from turning small stress into constant pressure. And over time, that creates something rare: stability. Not just physically, but mentally. And when you look at everything together, the pattern becomes impossible to miss. Nothing he does works in isolation. Training builds strength, but only because recovery supports it. Nutrition maintains balance, but only because stress doesn't constantly disrupt it. Movement keeps the system active, but only because it's consistent, not occasional. And his mindset protects all of it. This isn't luck, it's alignment. Every part of his life reinforces the others. And that leads to a conclusion that sounds simple but carries weight. Youth isn't something you chase, it's something you build. Quietly, daily, through decisions that seem small in the moment, but compound over time. Daunte didn't try to change everything at once. He built a system, and once that system was in place, the results stopped being temporary. They became his baseline. Which brings you to a different kind of question. Not how old you are, but what direction your daily choices are taking you in.